employees, Jeff, then moving sports to the club level is going to make sense. But then that's going to impact the jobs of people in the administration who help support all these sports programs. That seems to get into a question that you raised during the pandemic, frankly, if you remember, which was we were talking a lot about faculty health, and you said, well, how about the health and well-being of staff members and making sure that we got them? And so I'm like, that's one thought that occurs to me. I guess my other reflection is that I think we're going to see this sea change sooner rather than later. Like student athletes as employees, given what we just heard around the NIL collectives, feels more and more inevitable. And I still think that the IRS could come out and rule that, athletics at a college level are unrelated business income, which then would make them all taxable for these nonprofit schools. But here's the thing. If a bunch of sports become club sports, then that's going to impact the so-called Olympic pipeline, right? How America trains its athletes for Olympic sports, which, we've thrived in a very different model from the rest of the world. But I don't know that I see us starting to spend federal money on the Olympic sports. Like, given all the questions facing our country and dysfunction, it's not something I see happening. So I just wonder, will colleges still be at the center of that universe through some other twist and turn in your view? Or do you think we'll see like private enterprise step in, which frankly, that if that happened, like we got alternative sports leagues for these other sports, that could cut further, frankly, into the students attending colleges in some ways. And I just don't know where that ripple effect will go. But as you said, the Olympic Committee is certainly going to be looking at it. I'd love to get your take. What's the larger set of ripple effects here?
Yeah, it's unclear to me, Michael. I mean, if you look at where the most of the Olympians come from in terms of colleges in those Olympic sports, I think they tend to be among more elite public and private institutions, right? Like I know University of Virginia, for example, sent a ton of swimmers. This year, Stanford, we know, sends a ton of people to the Olympics every year. And if you remember, a couple of years ago, Stanford, tried to cut a couple of sports, and the alumni went up in arms, and Stanford has a lot of money, so they were able to bring those sports back. So I can't imagine that even in this new world that you will see at least some of these very elite institutions cut these Olympic sports. But that's still a very small number of institutions, and we need a lot of Olympians. So at some point, someone's going to have to step up. And I think at some point it's going to be the NFL, the NBA, and the U.S. Olympic Committee are going to have to start paying up in some way for what has largely been offloaded to colleges and universities to train future Olympians, future NBA stars, and future NFL stars. And I think it's been completely unfair among all of those places that they really haven't ponied up as much as I think they should have all these years for higher education, because they've essentially provided that talent to those entities. And so at some point they are going to have to pay up. I also think, by the way, this whole idea that we talked about in terms of the general manager, athletic offices, I think the office of the athletic director and all the staff that you have, you're going to need a whole different talent level there around trying to figure out the money, the employee status, and things like that. This can't be managed by the HR office at the college or university, right? This is going to have to be managed in a very different way by the athletic office. And I think we're going to see some outside money here. It's as we're recording this, I'm getting ready to go to the big P3 public-private partnership meeting in Denver at the University of Colorado at Denver, where you have a lot of people talking about public-private partnerships in higher ed. And I was fascinated that there is a whole panel on athletics, right? We tend to think of public-private partnerships around housing and around online education and things like that. And now I think we're going to start to see more public-private partnerships around athletics, because they're going to need to find revenue sources somewhere else than just besides, the TV rights and the conference rights and things like that. We're going to have to find new money somewhere.
So, Jeff, I think a perfect place to leave our conversation, and appreciate you diving into those points and things that we ought to think about. Of course, a huge thank you again to Matt Brown, our guest on this episode, for really laying out the scene for us. It is such a fast changing scene that we're probably going to have him back in a couple years because as I think we've demonstrated, this really does impact all of higher ed. Thank you, of course, to our listeners. And as a reminder, you can all follow us, Future You Podcast, on the social media channels. Go to futureyoupodcast.com, sign up for the newsletter that is coming out monthly. Follow Jeff Salingo at jsalingo on the social medias, me and Michael B. Horn. And for all of you, we appreciate you listening. We'll see you next time on Future You.